While our previous videos on the nomadic peoples from Central Asia's vast steppe might have informed you on a new tribe or confederation, almost everyone, history buff or otherwise, knows of the Seljuks. After bursting into the high medieval Middle East, these fearsome conquerors created a vast empire. The Turkic incursions into the traditionally Greek Anatolia would, centuries later, blossom into the mighty Ottoman Empire. However, to begin that story, we must travel hundreds of years into the past and, once again, look at events transpiring on the vast grasslands of Eurasia. We understand that not everyone likes the ads, but thanks to this ad from Raid Shadow Legends, we can keep our rendering equipment up to date, which is crucial for our work. So help us reach the goal of 70 installs by downloading the game from our link. You can follow the progress in the description. In Raid, you can explore millions of champion combinations and master countless tactics as you take on bosses, dungeon runs, campaign and PvP matches. With hundreds of artifacts to equip and over 500 champions with unique skills, build your team, develop your champions, and raid your way. What we love about the game is the beautiful background music that fits its epic setting. Everyone will find something that they'll enjoy, but for us the variety of champions is a great reason to keep playing. Raid recently released its biggest update, the Doom Tower, with 120 floors, many secret challenge rooms, and 12 bosses to take on. Please play through at least a tutorial and help us get as many installs as possible. Let's reach that goal in the description. If you're a new player and use our link, you'll get 50,000 silver, 50 gems, 1 energy refill, 1 clan boss key, 5 mystery shards, a 1-day XP booster, and 1 free champion, Hexweaver. All this will be waiting for you here. Download Raid using our link in the description or the QR code on the screen to get all of the rewards. At some point in the late 8th century, probably during the reign of Abbasid Caliph al-Mahdi, a horde of Turks, known as the Oghuz, migrated west into the vast steppe region between the Caspian and Aral seas. This area became home to the so-called Oghuz-Yabgu state, in which nomads would migrate vast distances in order to secure optimal seasonal pasturage for their herds. Though there were some sedentary settlements in this area, the imperial legacy left by the Gokturks had been inherited by the Khazars, to whom the Oghuz appear to have been at least loosely subordinated to. It is in the late 10th century Khazar realm that we find our first references to the Oghuz Turkic warlords, known to history as Dukak and his son, who we know as Seljuk. According to records composed during the reigns of later Seljuk sultans, the ancestors of their dynasty served Khazaria's Khagan as military commanders. This seems to imply that Seljuk and his father were active near Itil and might, like most of the other elite Khazars, have embraced Judaism. During the Khazar disintegration during the 960s, Seljuk migrated east with a small band. The true reasons for this are shrouded under the historical veil, but range from court intrigues to rebellion by Seljuk himself. Modern scholars even argue that changing climate might have forced Seljuk and his group to migrate in order to escape pasture shortage. Seljuk led his band of 100 horsemen, 1,500 camels, and 50,000 sheep to the town of Jand, located on the fringes of Islamic Khwarezm. Jand was the first Muslim-ruled region through which Seljuk's roving band passed, and it is there that Seljuk embraced the Islamic faith. This is a crucial moment in history, as it was a conversion which would have immense consequences. With that, Seljuk supposedly managed to gain more followers from the Turks of that frontier who inclined towards holy war, men who seem to have been Ghazi, warriors of Islam. This brings us to the reason for this increasing Islamization of the Turks, outlined by Korean historian Kim Ho-dong. Islam provided nomadic tribal people with the consciousness of a homogeneous religious community and religious sanction for the expansion of the domain of Islam, becoming an ideology of unification as well as an ideology of expansion. This is essentially all we know about Seljuk himself, who died in Jand in 1009, according to some sources at the age of 107. At that point, the region had been going through an upheaval for over a decade. Two militant new realms, the Karakhanids in Transoxiana and the former Turkic slave Ghaznavids in Khorasan and the Oxus, emerged. consuming vast tracts of the collapsing Samanid Emirate. Compounding this were events on the eastern steppe, where nomads known as the Khitans were disrupting matters in the process of their expansion into what the Chinese would call the Great Liao. This pushed waves of refugees towards the Islamic world's frontiers, right where Seljuks tribes were located. The Seljuks now began to gain strength rapidly, probably due to their ability to absorb many of these rowdy, disaffected nomadic warriors, many of whom converted to Islam and became Ghazi. After the progenitor's death, his elder son Arslan Israel became the tribe's chief, and we find him intervening in Transoxiana's politics, supporting a Karakhanid prince known as Ali Tegin, who tried to establish himself as ruler of Bukhara in 1020. Tegin was opposed by his own brother's most powerful supporter, Mahmud, Sultan of the Ghaznavids. It was in a military engagement on the steppe outside Bukhara that the Sultan of Ghazni first saw the Seljuks, and was somewhat awestruck with their numbers. No longer the small band of 100 people, they were now an increasingly potent threat. Mahmud's response was to seize and imprison Israel, either in battle or by intrigue, hoping that this would simply dissolve the burgeoning Seljuks, but he was wrong. Mahmud of Ghazna's actions did lead to some Seljuks joining his own Ghaznavid realm as soldiers, while some chose to flee west into Iran. However, most remained where they were, and a struggle for leadership began. By its end, 3 figures had taken their place at the top of the Seljuk hierarchy: Chagri and Tugril, who were the sons of Israel's brother Mikhail, and Musa, another relative of the inner clan. While the Seljuks were sorting themselves out, Mahmud's 32-year reign came to an end, and the Sultanate was inherited by a son, Masud, in 1030. Despite resolving their own leadership contest, the growing Seljuks were defeated in battle by the Karakhanids of Ali Tegin. No longer safe where they were, the Seljuk triad decided to flee towards Khorasan. They were assisted in this by a treacherous Ghaznavid governor in Khwarezm known as Harun, who helped the nomads pass through his lands in return for their help in conquering Khorasan province from his sovereign. Despite Harun's assassination at the hands of Masud's agents in 1035, the Seljuks continued south. Eventually they arrived in a town known as Nasser, located in the mountains of Khorasan. Khorasan was an important province. It was one of the jewels in the crown of Ghaznavid power, and now seemed very vulnerable. While nomadic life and reputation is often a very ruthless one, the Seljuks weren't just wandering mass killers hungry for conquest. They were people seeking more prosperous lives for themselves and their families. So rather than invading, the Seljuk chiefs authored a diplomatic proposal to the Ghaznavid governor, Suri, explaining their situation and exodus, and asking him to intercede with Sultan Masud on their behalf. The Seljuks essentially pledged their service and homage to the Sultan and his court, promising to rest in his great shadow if only they were granted a small province of their own on Khorasan's frontiers where they could settle. Moreover, they also pledged to defend Ghaznavid territories from other Turkic tribes. Seljuk leadership stated that, if, God forbid, the Sultan does not agree, we do not know what will happen, for we have nowhere else to go. However, Masud, distrustful because of previous damage inflicted by Seljuks in his territory, declined the offer and prepared to march for war. This expedition was a total disaster that ended when the Sultan's army was hit by a cavalry ambush on the plains near Nasser in June 1035. While the Sultan quickly acceded to the now seemingly quite modest Seljuk demands, the Seljuks, feeling in control of the situation, began sending even steeper demands. When these were declined, Seljuk hordes swept through Khorasan, capturing all of it, including the great cities of Merv and Nishapur by 1038. The sole exception was Balkh, which remained in Masud's grip. War continued for the next 2 years, with ever more Ghaznavid forces being poured into the defense of Khorasan against the Seljuks. Though we don't know much about the campaigns, we have an idea of why the nomads eventually won. Masud's armies were incredibly powerful, having inherited traditions of Indian elephant use and possessing high-quality, heavily armoured Mamluk slave infantry. However, these tactics were not suited for extended steppe warfare, while the swift, lightly armoured Seljuk Turks, mounted on their fast horses, had little issue. The potential for Seljuk cavalry armies to attack anywhere allowed them to stretch and scatter Masud's armies thinly across the entire Khorasan area. Although sometimes successful in restoring their authority in some areas, the Ghaznavids failed to resecure the province, and were eventually met for the final battle at the small town of Dandanakan near Merv in May 1040. A massive Ghaznavid army, with many dozens of elephants in tow, marched from Nishapur towards Merv in search of the Seljuks, but its legions of troops were exhausted from the long desert road and a lack of supplies. When a brawl broke out between the Sultan's elite guard and his regular soldiers over the use of a water source, Chagri, who had been quietly shadowing Masud's lumbering army with his own units, pounced just as the Ghaznavid squabbling was reaching its peak. Mounted Seljuk Ghazi, wielding their fearsome composite bows, swarmed the numerically superior but disorganized force that was arrayed in front of them, completely destroying the enemy army. Masud fled back towards India, but quickly met his death in a palace coup. After the victory at Dandanakan, the Seljuks seem to have been in a state of disbelief. They first refused to believe Masud had been defeated, and it is said they kept themselves close to their horses in fear of being caught by surprise when the Ghaznavids returned. When the leadership eventually did realize just how crushing their triumph had been, they set about securing Khorasan for themselves. Hostile sources emphasize devastation in the province caused by the Seljuks and their animals, but it can't have been entirely their doing. After all, Masud's giant army had also been placing a severe burden on the region during years of campaigning. Pro-Seljuk texts especially emphasize the role that Tugril played in restoring order and crushing the bandits which had arisen following the collapse of Ghaznavid authority. Rather than acting as a steppe warlord with his boot on the necks of those whom he had conquered, Tugril, who became the prominent Seljuk triumvir at this point, began to act in the manner of a legitimate Islamic ruler. It is said that Tugril even went so far as to threaten suicide if his brother Chagri sacked the city of Nishapur. Upon taking his seat on Masud's throne in the city, Tugril claimed the title of Sultan and asked for guidance from the Islamic judges installed by the previous regime, proclaiming that, "We are new men and strangers, and we do not know the Persians' customs." The Turks had accepted Islam, but had done so on their own terms, with nomadic traditions, customs, and tribesmen still making up the majority of Seljuk strength. From this point, a Turkic flavour was added to the Islamic world, which it still maintains to this day. It also seems that the first elements of Seljuk statehood began to appear, with coins being minted in the name of Tugril and the Caliph in Baghdad, who was still symbolically revered as the leader of Islam. Each Seljuk leader went on their own path at about this time. Musa was given Herat to govern, while the two leading partners, Chagri and Tugril, were given the eastern and western areas respectively. The former repulsed a series of attempted Ghaznavid reconquests from India and began Seljuk raids on Sistan, while his brother prepared to advance west, deeper into the Islamic world. The areas of Iraq and Iran not yet under Seljuk control were, for the most part, ruled by a group of Shiite princes known together as the Buyids. These regional sovereigns often squabbled and jostled with one another for power. Beginning in about 1080, through a mix of diplomacy, opportunistic backing of regional allies, and outright conquest, the militarily supreme Seljuks asserted sovereignty over the Iranian plateau. As nomads, the Seljuks largely concentrated on the countryside pasture for their animals, and a few main cities, such as Rey and Hamadan, which served as bases. Aside from these strategic settlements, Tugril made little effort to assert direct rule over urban areas. Therefore, many city dwellers in the annexed lands experienced almost no change in the short term, and local princes were even allowed to continue their own feuding as long as they did it under Seljuk auspices. In this period, we also have clear evidence of Seljuk administrative practices. In the key cities under direct rule, agents were installed, essentially Turkic governors who prioritized the raising of revenue from the cities they governed. As the realm's governance matured, though, it became more than just wealth extraction. After Isfahan was conquered in 1051, a system of tax exemptions was put into practice to tempt peasants back onto lands that they had previously abandoned. Forts were also constructed in order to ensure the security of nearby roads from bandits, a measure intended to reassure merchants and boost trade activity. Tughril's actions so far had attracted the attention of Baghdad's Abbasid government, particularly Caliph al-Qa'im's vizier, a man named Ibn Muslima. The greatest of Tughril's achievements, however, was yet to come. Abbasid rulers had largely lost political control over the peripheral regions of their formerly vast empire by the 11th century, but there was an understanding that the Caliph in Baghdad was the symbolic leader of Sunni Islam and had to be respected as such. However, the Shiite Buyids occupying Iran barely acknowledged his authority at all, leading to a Sunni reaction in the Round City, a reaction led by al-Qa'im's aforementioned vizier, who was known for his fanatical hatred of the Shiites. He saw the potential of these increasingly powerful Sunni Turks as allies, and, despite his caliph's initial suspicion, convinced al-Qa'im to establish good relations with Tughril. In Muslima's mind, the Seljuks would be a deadly sword for use against his rivals in the city, most prominently the commander of Baghdad's Turkic slave troops, a Shiite general named al-Basasiri. The vizier and Tughril planned extensively for Seljuk intervention in the City of Peace. Muslima had various religious titles granted to the Turk leader, and in 1053 proclaimed persecution of heretics in both Baghdad and Tughril's city of Nishapur simultaneously. The intended symbolism was clear. Tughril and the Abbasid Caliph were allies, and al-Qa'im's enemies were Tughril's enemies, making the latter a legitimate sultan. With the road paved specifically for his advance, a nomadic Seljuk army advanced into Khuzestan on the borders of Iraq, its leader proclaiming that he intended to perform the Hajj, the traditional pilgrimage to Mecca, and to lead an expedition against the Shiite Fatimid Caliphate of Egypt afterwards. Whether or not Tughril actually intended to do this is irrelevant. It was another piece of deliberately engineered propaganda aimed at showing his credentials as a legitimate Sunni ruler. Seeing the writing on the wall, General al-Basasiri fled Baghdad. Then, finally, Tughril and his Seljuks peacefully entered Baghdad in December of 1055, during the Islamic holy month of Ramadan. They were welcomed by a procession of local notables and crowds which had gathered to see what was happening. It is at this moment of Sultan Tughril's greatest achievement that we shall leave him and conclude by examining just how far the Seljuks had come and where they would go. In the later 900s, Seljuk and his tiny group of only 100 Oghuz Turks had crossed into the Muslim world as irrelevant pastoralists. Less than a century later, his grandson was riding into Islam's most glorious city at the head of a massive Turkic army, tens of thousands strong, having received the formal backing of Islam's most revered religious figure. Though this was likely the proudest moment of Tughril's life, the apogee of the great Seljuk Empire was yet to come when it fought against the Fatimids and invaded Anatolia, eventually defeating the Romans at Manzikert a few decades later. We always have more stories to tell, so make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have pressed the bell button. We would like to express our gratitude to our Patreon supporters and channel members who make the creation of our videos possible. Now you can also support us by buying our merchandise via the link in the description. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.